When we speak of ships, we talk about the way that we describe them. One tells tragedy, like the sinking of the RMS Titanic or the Lusitania, or another of heroism, like that of the RMS Carpathia. But if there is one ship that deserves the title of the infamous, it would go to a German battleship. Her presence brought the whole entire Royal Navy fleet to destroy her for good. Although the ship does bear its country's founder, if you ever look up the name, you don't find the man Otto von Bismarck himself. You find the ship itself. This one does not really need an introduction. You all know who she is. It's May 27th, 1941, the day of reckoning. Judgment Day is called upon a battle-stricken Bismarck. 3 days before, the German fleet of Bismarck and Prince Eugen engaged on the Royal Navy's HMS Hood and their newest battleship, the HMS Prince of Wales. During the naval engagement, a wide salvo was fired from the Bismarck and plunged into the Hood, detonating her magazine hold and exploded into two. It would be this that the Royal Navy declared vengeance on the Bismarck. A day before, a torpedo from a Fairey Swordfish plane from the Royal Navy aircraft carrier Ark Royal slammed a torpedo in one of the two rudders of the Bismarck, crippling her steering and flooding the stern. Captain Lindemann did nothing but watch his ship turn into the face of the oncoming Royal Navy fleet, a price paid in iron and blood, and preparing for what would be Bismarck's final stand. Before we talk about the battle, and not get ahead of ourselves, we will go over the two major factions and their combatant ships. For the Kriegsmarine side is the Bismarck, with construction commenced on July 1st of 1936 at the Blohm & Voss shipyard in Hamburg, Germany, after the keel was laid down and launched on February 14, 1939, to a maiden fanfare to the Hamburg waterways with Adolf Hitler in presence. The Bismarck is one of the two battleships that was designed in the mid-1930s by the German Kriegsmarine as a counter to the French naval expansion in response to the two Richelieu-class battleships that France started working on. After the signing of the Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935, Bismarck, along with her sister ship Tirpitz, were within the 35,000 long-ton limit that was imposed by the Washington Naval Treaty, to which governs any battleship construction in the interwar period and should not exceed the weight limit as imposed earlier. The Bismarck class exceeded the figure by a wide margin. Both ships were named after two big figures of Germany. Bismarck was named after Otto von Bismarck, a conservative Prussian statesman who served as the first chancellor of the German Empire from 1871 to 1890 and is nicknamed the Iron Chancellor, transforming a collection of independent states into the dominant European power of Germany. Tirpitz would be named after the Grand Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, the architect and the founder of the Imperial German Navy. It would have been this ship to be the first, but Bismarck carried a bigger role and a bigger responsibility. Since this video is about the Bismarck, a future video on Tirpitz will be released in the future. Bismarck is classified as a fast battleship. Like the Scharnhorst class of Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the Bismarck class is designed to outrun heavier foes while possessing significant power with speeds of 30 to 31 knots, and she could fire its guns and maintain a gun solution. Bismarck would be powered with huge Blohm & Voss geared steam turbines, each of them powering the three triple screw propellers, and her top speed is an impressive 30 knots. Bismarck and Tirpitz both displaced 41,700 tons as built and 50,300 tons fully loaded with a length of 251 meters, a beam of 36 meters, and a draft of 9.9 meters. The biggest feature of the Bismarck is her armor, as 19,000 metric tons of the ship's hull was built with armor, giving protection of the Bismarck of machinery, ammunition, and operation spaces were housed deep inside the citadel of the ship. In contrast, the only ship to be designed at this time with more armor than the Bismarck is the Imperial Japan Navy's Yamato at 22,000 metric tons, and only 33% of its weight is armor. The issue with the armor on Bismarck is that not everything is protected, as the ship is almost to the weight limit, and there was a cutback on the structural integrities of armor, especially the bow and stern sections that are not properly armored, considering where the storage tanks for the bow and the stern is also the heaviest, considering where the steering gear is. Then comes Bismarck's second feature, her gunnery. She has 8 primary main battery guns. Each of them are SKC-34 38 centimeters that can fire 1,800 pound shells at high muzzle velocity of 2,000 feet per second, maintaining accuracy while hitting hard and giving armor penetration and range up to 35.5 kilometers. Each of the 4 guns, 2 forward and 2 aft, are named Anton, Bruno, Caesar, and Dora respectively. She also has 12 15cm L55 guns and 6 twin turrets, designed for surface engagement, and alongside 16 separate 10.5cm of dual-purpose guns for anti-aircraft defenses. You know the song infamously says it perfectly, firing guns as big as steers from shells as big as trees. Bismarck's rangefinders and fire control, including advanced optical instruments of various sizes that are used for precise main and anti-aircraft fire control. The Fumo 23 radar antenna has a frequency of 368 MHz and operated on an 81.5 cm wavelength with a power output of 9 kW at 500 kHz. These Fumos were not equipped with a planned position indicator display system that is familiar with today's radars. They could hardly detect more than one target at a time, and bearings were not as accurate. For aircraft on the Bismarck, and yes, she did have a few aircraft as well, as it is accustomed to large battleships to have aircraft on board. She carried 4 Ardo AR-196 float planes used for reconnaissance, with 1 at the ready on the launch for the steam catapult and 3 more in the hangars. A drawback on the Bismarck is the drag that she would have on her, and this is due to her wide beam. While the Bismarck has incredible speed and rudder authority, this could do about the same as the Delta airplane, but both run into the same issue when it comes to making aggressive maneuvers, whether if it's evading a torpedo or a missile. The massive frontage of the vehicle is exposed its front to the point of resistance to the direction of travel, and this for a battleship, it results into almost coming to a full complete stop for an evasive maneuver, and regardless due to your control inputs, the momentum will keep the ship going during a turn and almost come to a complete stop, and that will make Bismarck a sitting duck, especially at a full combat load, and being fast as she can be, it will take a while to get back up and going. On February 14, 1939, the Bismarck was launched with a full fanfare, with Adolf Hitler in attendance and christened by Dorothy von Lohenfeld, the granddaughter of the Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Hitler would make his christening speech, invoke the spirit, and hope the ship's crew would embody his strength, which is a contrast to the blood and iron policies of unification. On August 24th, 1940, the Bismarck is now commissioned into the Kriegsmarine after the outfitting process to commence sea trials. The ship was taken into the Baltic Sea after commissioning and tested phase speed, maneuverability, and gunnery. It was at this time that a design flaw was pointed out. poor turning due to the propeller design, but regardless either way, the ship was ready for Atlantic operations by May of 1941 and went back for replenishing at Brest. At this time, 2,065 men, 103 officers, and 1,962 non-commissioned officers and men are commissioned to the Bismarck, and commanding them is Captain or Kapitan C. Ernest Lindemann, with Admiral Gunther Lütjens as fleet commander. At this time, Admiral Radar created a bold plan, Operation Rhine or Rheinübung, which is a largest surface force to take on the Royal Navy and sink merchant ships that consists of Bismarck, Gneisenau, Scharnhorst, Admiral Hipper, Prinz Eugen, and Tirpitz coming down the line. As preparation for this operation was underway, a Royal Air Force bombing squadron interrupted this procedure. Now, fortunately, the Bismarck didn't get hit, but everyone else got hit except for the Prinz Eugen, who, due to previously getting hit in the past, and also German waterways, would also be mined as well. With pressure from the higher-ups, Admiral Radar went ahead with Operation Rhine with only Prinz Eugen and the battleship Bismarck, and both ships set sail at 200 hours on the 19th of May, under escort with destroyer and minesweeper flotilla led by Z-23, doing battle with the most experienced navy, setting sail to Kattegat. Meanwhile, for the Royal Navy, they received a report from a Swedish naval vessel named Gotland and made a report. 2 large ships, 3 destroyers, 5 escort vessels, 10 to 12 aircraft spotted, passing Maastricht. Course 205 degrees by 20. Bismarck's bridge crew picked this up in the transmission before the British naval attaché in Sweden is alerted. They know their cover has been blown, and code breakers continue to listen in with interest. With RAF Spitfire recon planes were deployed, and photographs of the vessels were placed on Admiral John Tovey's desk as soon as it left the development room. Prinz Eugen and Bismarck are clearly in the same photograph together. Then at Scapa Flow, crews for both HMS Prince of Wales and the mighty battlecruiser Hood are now on full alert. Tune again to part 2, to where we discuss the Royal Navy's side, the HMS Hood and the HMS Prince of Wales, the Royal Navy's newest King George V battleship. It's May 24th, 1941. A white ensign flag was fluttering in the breeze. A Royal Navy battlecruiser and their newest battleship, the HMS Prince of Wales, set out to hunt down and intercept 2 German vessels from Scapa Flow, Bismarck and Prinz Eugen, who were suspected to be in the Denmark Strait. Under the command of Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, they set out to pursue with other groups of British capital ships to intercept the German ships before they break out into the Atlantic and attack convoys. Both ships engaged, with Hood firing on the Prinz Eugen, and the Germans returned fire, with Eugen scoring a shell hit on the Hood's boat deck between her funnels and starting to fire. With Hood turning broadside, bringing her stern guns into battle, Bismarck's salvo fired wide that tore through the Hood. And disaster happened. A jet of flame burst out and the explosion broke the Hood's back, killing nearly 1,418 men, as there were 3 survivors. But before the battle itself, and just like with the Bismarck itself, we're going to talk about another combatant that engaged on the Bismarck, His Majesty's ship's Hood. The HMS Hood is a battlecruiser for the Royal Navy and was the first of the planned Admiral-class battlecruisers to be built for the First World War and was under construction when the Battle of Jutland occurred. She was laid down on September 1st in 1916 at the John Brown and Company shipyard in Clydebank, Scotland. If you are familiar with this shipyard, this is where the RMS Lusitania was built at, and later the RMS Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth II. The Hood is named after Admiral Samuel Hood, First Viscount Hood, a Royal Navy officer and politician who saw action during the War of the Austrian Succession and even led the British fleet to victory at the Battle of Mona Passage in April of 1782, and to become the Commander-in-Chief of Portsmouth, and then First Naval Lord, and briefly returning to the Portsmouth Command, became Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet during the Revolutionary Wars. He commanded 6 vessels from Jamaica to Victory to even a Greenwich hospital. During her years after commissioning, she would visit Australia in April of 1924 in order to escort the HMAS Australia out to sea to where she would be scuttled, visiting Lisbon in January of 1925 to participate in the Vasco da Gama celebrations. She received the first of her refits from May 1, 1929 to March 10, 1931, and later resumed her role as a flagship of the battle cruiser squadron. That same year, her crew partook in the Invergordon mutiny over pay cuts for the sailors. Fortunately, it ended peacefully and the Hood returned home. The battlecruiser squadron made a Caribbean cruise in early of 1932 and was given a brief refit at Portsmouth. In a few years, her secondary and anti-aircraft fire control directors were rearranged during a quick refit in 1934. The Hood had an accident while en route to Gibraltar for a Mediterranean cruise when another battlecruiser, the HMS Renown, rammed her into her port side quarterdeck. The damage was limited to her left outer propeller and a massive dent. Repairs were made and both ships sailed to Portsmouth for permanent repairs, and both captains were court-martialed, as was the squadron's commander, Rear Admiral Sidney Bailey, although both captains would be later acquitted. The Hood didn't see combat action, but was involved in many showing the flag exercises between commissioning in 1920 and the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, including training exercises in the Mediterranean. She was attached to the Mediterranean Fleet following the outbreak of the Second Italo-Ethiopian War in 1935 and remained when the Spanish Civil War happened. At this time frame, she could use an overhaul and a massive rebuild in 1941 as advances in naval gunnery reduced the Hood's usefulness. As we all know, on September 1st of 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and 2 days later, Great Britain and France declared war on Nazi Germany afterwards. She would be dispatched to Scapa Flow and operated in the area as a convoy escort and later defenses against a possible German invasion fleet. The Hood never received a modern refit that would bring her up to standard to those of modernized World War-era capital ships at the time. Joining alongside her is the newest battleship for the Royal Navy, the HMS Prince of Wales, a King George V class battleship of the Royal Navy. In the previous video, we talked about the Bismarck's armaments and power. Now we can go over the Hood's own specifications and firepower. The Hood can displace at 46,680 long tons, measures up to 860 feet, with a beam of 104 feet, draught of 32 feet, and is installed with 24 Yarrow boilers, all connected to 4 Brown Curtis gear steam turbine engines connecting to 4 shafts, to which can propel the Admiral-class battlecruiser at 31 knots. The main battery for the Hood consists of 8 BL 15-inch Mark I guns and hydraulically powered twin-gun turrets, and they were designated A, B, X, and Y from bow to stern respectively, and could fire a 1,938-pound armor-piercing round that could be fired with significant force to penetrate armor. Her secondary armament consists of 12 BL 5.5-inch M1 guns, to which each of them can fire 200 rounds, and were shipped on shielded single pivot mounts fitted alongside the upper deck and the forward shelter. At one point, she carried anti-aircraft armament, which consists of 4 QF 4-inch Mark V guns on single mounts. In the 1931 refit, a pair of optical mountings for 2-pounder pom-pom AA guns, and she even included 4 above-water 21-inch tubes located abreast the rear funnel. She was going to have 6 21-inch torpedo tubes, which include submerged ones, but were actually deleted during that refit. Her armor was a blend of speed and World War I era protection, to which featured a thick angled main belt but relatively thin deck armor, thus making her vulnerable to plunging fire. Prior before hostilities broke out, the Hood was assigned to patrol the vicinity of Iceland and the Faroe Islands to protect convoys and intercept German merchant raiders and blockade runners trying to break out into the Atlantic waters. On June 18th of 1940, the Hood sortied with the HMS Ark Royal and were ordered to Gibraltar to join up with Force H and took part in the destruction of the French fleet at Mers el Kebir in July, 8 days after the French surrender, giving the French the ultimatum that if French fleet at Oran interns their ships in a British or neutral ports as long as they don't fall into the Axis powers. The French rejected this offer, and the Royal Navy sent shells into the French fleet, damaging the Dunkerque and Bretagne. Afterwards, the Hood would be relieved of Force H and returned to Scapa Flow. She would be sent to Rosyth along with the Nelson and Rodney and other ships to intercept a German invasion fleet, to which diminished. Then in November, all 3 battlecruisers were deployed in the Bay of Biscay to prevent the heavy cruiser Admiral Scheer from using French ports. Leading up to her final months in 1941, the Hood began a refit that lasted until March, and after the refit, she was still in poor condition, but the threat from German capital ships were such that she couldn't be taken into dock for a major overhaul until the King George V class battleships came into service. She was assumed command by Captain Ralph Kerr and was ordered to sea in an attempt to intercept Gneisenau and Scharnhorst upon the completion of her refit. She was unsuccessful of intercepting, but was ordered to patrol to prevent any breakout attempt by the German ships from Brest, France. From April 19th, she was ordered into the Norwegian Sea, and at this time the Admiralty received a message about the German battleship Bismarck, but it was a false report. She would then patrol the North Atlantic before being put into Scapa Flow on May 6th. With the Swedish reports and the photos confirmed of Bismarck and Prince Eugen are on their way west on Admiral Tovey's desk, whistles and frantic messages by Morse code between captains were transmitted, while NCOs were yelling out orders to load guns, and both Hood, under the command of Captain Ralph Kerr, and also flying the flag of Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, and the newest King George V class battleship, the HMS Prince of Wales, under the command of Captain John Leach, set out from Hull Fleet in Scapa Flow. They were ordered to set speed and intercept the German ships and reinforce 2 heavy cruisers, the Suffolk and Norfolk. Prince of Wales left in such a hurry that she left Scapa Flow with her civilian contractors working out the issues with Prince of Wales guns that were untested. They set out northwest, and in the coming days, the fate of thousands rests in the hands of the Royal Navy. In the early morning hours of May 24th at 5:45, with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen ahead of Bismarck in their formation, lookouts spotted 2 capital ships coming out of smoke plumes at flank speed. They noticed one of them was sporting a quadruple gun turret, and ahead of them is the Hood, with guns just as big as theirs, and a white ensign fluttering in the breeze, and action stations were called across both ships. It is now the early morning hours of May 24th, 1941. After deciphering messages and observing photographs that were taken from RAF Spitfire recon planes, It is confirmed that Bismarck's preparing to break out into the Atlantic to sink merchant convoys, and the only way to stop them is to take the fight head-on to the enemy. Hood and Prince of Wales began an intercept course and are ready to engage against both ships. Hood and Prince of Wales left Scapa Flow to head northwest towards the German ships, with Hood leading the way and the Prince of Wales following afterwards. Prince of Wales left in such a hurry that she left with civilian contractors still on board as they were troubleshooting an issue with the Prince of Wales guns as they were jammed during builders' trials. She was immediately rushed into service before full testing, and little they knew, they were going to see the coming days to decide the fates of thousands. When we last left the Bismarck and Prince Eugen, they were heading west towards the Denmark Strait, and their mission is to sink British merchant convoys and hope that the British will starve into submission, but not to engage in combat with any Royal Navy warships. Both ships were zigzagging continuously through the cold North Arctic waters to avoid ice floes and to stay on constant watch to look for any Royal Navy ships as they enter the Denmark Strait on the morning of the 23rd of May, with the likely possibility of British patrols being in this area. Admiral Lütjens would turn on Bismarck's radar and increase speed so that way they can avoid the possibility of engaging with the Royal Navy and breaking into the North Atlantic. Little they knew, they were actually being watched. Light cruisers HMS Suffolk sighted the Bismarck on visual and radar contact and reported their position to headquarters and immediately got out of range. Bismarck saw the Suffolk and got an accurate fix, and due to the weather, the accurate fire would be impossible, and Suffolk would shadow the ship. They knew the Royal Navy would arrive, as it would be a matter of time. The HMS Norfolk arrived to aid the Suffolk to get a closer look at the Bismarck and obtain information on the speed, heading, bearing, and direction of where the ship is going, just in case information is incorrect. Norfolk drifted too close to the Bismarck, and the Bismarck sees Norfolk approach too closely and fired off a full defiant salvo, bracketing the Norfolk on the first shot. This resulted in Norfolk making smoke and going back into the fog bank, and this proven that Bismarck's rangefinders is as deadly as it was claimed to be. But unfortunately, there was another design flaw, and seriously, how many design flaws does this ship actually have? The gunnery officers discovered that the Bismarck's gun placement caused shockwaves in the main guns to knock the radars out beyond repair, and Bismarck is now reduced to visual contact only. Lütjens allowed Prince Eugen to take the lead as they had to leave the Denmark Strait in order to break out, but little they knew, they were going to be too late, and the fog started to slowly lift as dawn broke and the horizon brightened. Lookouts called out smoke plumes from the horizon as two large plumes coming from battleships. At 5:45 a.m., visual contact of the Hood and Prince of Wales were made. They noticed that one of the ships had quadruple guns, and the lead ship is a battlecruiser at flank speed with guns bigger as theirs. It was the HMS Hood. Task forces across both ships went to action stations, and main batteries came online with courses plotted and ranges estimated. Admiral Holland miscalculated the range and bearing towards Bismarck is wrong, as they should be further ahead, but Bismarck and Prince Eugen are crossing the T formation in front of them. The original plan was for the Royal Navy ships to be ahead so that way they could fire full broadside. The night prior, both Royal Navy ships lost contact with the ships and steered closer to Iceland, and in the morning they found themselves out of position. For the Prince of Wales, it was no issue, but for the Hood, her upper armor and deck protection is far too weak to go up against a German fast capital battleship. Holland would have to increase speed to make Hood's guns effective against Bismarck's armor and remove the threat of arcing fire and for interception while resorting to using front guns. At 5:52 a.m., Hood fired first. Then the Prince of Wales fired upon the Prince Eugen, and she would later return fire upon the offenders, and the engagement is now on. One of the shells from Prince Eugen hit the Hood's primary ammunitions locker, starting a furious fire and killing several crew members. At this point, Bismarck's guns remained silent. Captain Leach noticed Admiral Holland's error in size between both ships and ordered fire on the Bismarck, with shells screaming at 2,000 miles per hour. Prince of Wales shells hit the Bismarck, punched through the bow section, holing the oil tanks and sending a torrent into the ocean. Another shot in this salvo also wrecked the steam catapult for the AR-196 spotter airplane, and the third shot fell short and detonated underneath her armor belt, flooding a generator room and threatening a boiler room. At this point, Royal Navy gunnery and some luck found its mark with the Bismarck. Fleet Commander Lutyens did not pass on any order to fire at the Royal Navy ships at this time, as Prince Eugen continues fire upon both Royal Navy ships. Captain Lindemann, furious at his commanding officers and the damage Bismarck received, turned at his officers and yelled at a range, "I'm not letting this ship get shot out from under my arse! Open fire!" With that command alone, Bismarck's guns barked to life, firing lethal shells at the Hood. Admiral Holland felt that he directed the Hood close enough for the Bismarck to ensure a proper battle and tried to turn the ship's stern over to bring her stern gun turrets to battle broadside, alongside with the Prince of Wales. This would throw off the gunners from Bismarck as the first salvo went wide. The plan was to have the Germans fire at a flat trajectory to strike the Hood's armor rather than the thin decking. As the firepower from the Royal Navy vessels reached its peak, other batteries joined in on the fight. Bismarck's second salvo straddles the length of the Hood and puts the rangefinders to the test as a shell strikes the compass tower. Hood fired back at the Bismarck, but with no success. The same would be said with the Prince of Wales, who earlier managed to score 3 hits to continue bracketing the Bismarck as Prince Eugen used her small caliber machine gun to harass the Prince of Wales. And then, tragedy. Bismarck's third salvo was fired approximately 16,650 meters. Most of the shells fell wide, all but one, and this tore into the spotting top of the Hood, completely dead center. The armor-piercing shell breached into its hull, igniting the powder in the main magazine, sending a tower of flame high up into the air. The tower of flame caused the hull of the Hood to bend violently, and the ship exploded, with her main guns shooting up out of their turrets, disintegrating the aft section of the ship, twisting and shearing the ship in two. The bow of the Hood was lifted up into the air, with no abandoned ship order was given, and, if it was believed, the men inside the A turret, with escape damn impossible, fired a defiant salvo before slipping into the surface. The Hood was lost in less than 3 minutes, and out of the 1,418 that were on board, 1,415 were killed, but only 3 would survive. Bob Tilburn, Bill Dundas, and Ted Briggs were rescued by the HMS Electra after 3 hours in the water, and the Royal Navy would not let the Hood's death be in vain. Bismarck and Prince Eugen focused on the next ship, the HMS Prince of Wales. This new ship, but inexperienced in combat, but also experiencing mechanical problems. She has 10 14-inch guns, and 8 of them are quadruple guns that are now malfunctioning. Bismarck and Prince Eugen quickly switched targets and rapidly fired their primary and second armaments with devastating effects. The first hit strikes the compass tower above Prince of Wales, and this would kill all the officers standing on the bridge except for Captain Leach and 2 other officers. The second struck at Director's control tower aft of the compass tower, and the next serious hits hit the aircraft crane or the funnel, and Captain Leach knew that the HMS Prince of Wales could not take on both ships at the same time, resulting in making smoke and retreating to the southeast. She was hit 7 times by the salvos, killing 14 men. Prince of Wales fired 23 salvos. Captain Lindemann offered to go after the Prince of Wales, but Admiral Lutyens declined, considering they have damage of their own after Bismarck was struck 3 times by the Prince of Wales, and orders said that they cannot engage on Royal Navy vessels but sink convoys while not risking the Bismarck in another surface action, and any possible stealth are diminished as torrents of oil were leaking from the fuel storage on the Bismarck and developed a slight list, making her progress visible. Had Bismarck gone after the Prince of Wales, they would meet with a relief team waiting for them. Now here's a poll question to our warship fans and historians. Do you think Admiral Lutyens made the right call? Leave your answer down in the comments box below. Bismarck would break away from Prince Eugen and try to head to Nazi-occupied France for immediate repairs and ordered Prince Eugen to go after convoys. With Eugen successfully detached, Bismarck, damaged from the Prince of Wales, started sailing towards France, meeting up with Gneisenau and Scharnhorst for further operations. At number 10 Downing Street and the Admiralty House in London stayed lit into the evening hours, with discussions regarding how to continue and seek vengeance. First Lord of the Admiralty, Commander-in-Chief of Home Fleet, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill sent out an all message to the British Home Fleet and other ships with one simple standing order: Bismarck must be sunk at all costs. On May 24, 1941, a wide defiant salvo shell was fired from the Bismarck and destroyed the HMS Hood, killing 1,415 sailors, with only 3 surviving. HMS Prince of Wales tried to avenge her fallen partner, but due to her being inexperienced in combat with untested guns, the Prince of Wales made smoke and turned away from Bismarck and Prince Eugen as they constantly rained shells down on her. The British Admiralty's response was multifaceted: shock, grief, and a desire of revenge. Winston Churchill's order, a massive naval operation to hunt down the Bismarck, with only one standing order that was relayed to all ships of Home Fleet: Bismarck must be sunk at all costs. The mind on the British is vengeance. The first batch of ships that were called up to join Home Fleet were 2 Revenge-class ships, the HMS Vengeance and the HMS Ramillies. Their jobs to cut off any possibility of escape for the Bismarck, but they wouldn't take part of the final battle. The main force is Royal Navy's finest. The heavy hitters will be the modern battleships and cruisers, along with a quick response team of Force H from Gibraltar with Ark Royal, Battlecruiser Renown, and light cruiser HMS Sheffield. Home Fleet's reinforcements will be stacked with their powerful heavy hitters from the HMS Rodney, who was escorting the MV Britannic at the time the Hood was lost, battleship HMS King George V, battlecruiser HMS Repulse, and destroyer Dorsetshire. Joined the fray under the escort of the 4th Destroyer Flotilla, the HMS Maori, Zulu, Sikh, and Cossack, and the Polish destroyer, the ORP Piorun. And reinforcing them is the HMS Victorious. Prince of Wales recovered and brought back 9 of her 10 main guns and sorted with HMS Suffolk and Norfolk and shadowed the Bismarck, who was heading to France. Bismarck was preparing to detach Prince Eugen and allow her to sink her own convoys, and at 1814 on the 24th of May under a rain squall, Prince Eugen was successfully detached and made a run to the open sea. The cruiser forces made moves to chase, but it didn't happen. In that rain squall, the Bismarck appeared only as a ghost form and fired upon the British, with neither shells hitting each other. Instead of rather taking the Bismarck head on, they had to find a way to slow the Bismarck down to reduce her speed. The only possibility of slowing her down is by air and outdated biplanes. Help is a long way from Bismarck and she's on her way to France, and there's only one way, rather than rely on their gunnery, but their pilots. The one aircraft the British have in their arsenal are the Fairey Swordfish torpedo bomber planes. The senior staff has to rely on their naval aviators from the 825th Naval Air Squadron, fresh out of carrier train on board the HMS Victorious and inexperienced. And being asked to take on the most heavily defended battleship ever built, the Swordfish planes took off from carriers to patrol the North Atlantic to look for the Bismarck. Given the inexperience of the aviators, they lined up one ship on an attack run and misidentified one ship. This would be the HMS Norfolk. Norfolk randomly signaled the planes by signal lamp to let them know they are friendlies. As they resumed their patrol, they noticed a smaller much vessel in the water, way too small to be a battleship, and this would be the cutter, the USS Modoc from the U.S. Coast Guard. As the planes buzzed around, they accidentally found the Bismarck and began to fill up the skies with AA fire. Swordfish Squadron lined up their planes and torpedoes were hit, were guaranteed, but in luck, the design of the slow and outmotored Swordfish planes and the higher mounted AA guns could not traverse low enough for a shot. The planes would release their torpedoes, and with Bismarck's rudder control and authority, she evaded 8 torpedoes, but only one hit her in midships, causing minor structural damage and killing a crew member as a shockwave blast sent him into a bulkhead while damaging a previously damaged generator room. Bismarck's rapid maneuverability with the rudder caused a collision match and patches that were applied after her engagement with the Prince of Wales all gave way after the rapid changes of direction and speed, and this would result in the flooding of the second boiler room, slowing the ship down to 18 knots. The collision mats were later reapplied, and damage control conducted their work, and Bismarck is brought back up to speed. The Prince of Wales will fire upon the Bismarck, letting them know they are not going anywhere. 825 Squadron did bought time, but it was not enough. The Germans made headway at max cruise into U-boat territory at the western approaches and to avoid getting hit by Kriegsmarine reinforcements. Bismarck would have to zigzag. The biggest mystery for the British is where to find the Bismarck by visual contact, as they think she might head to France for repairs, west to meet up with an oiler, or worse, round up on top of them. As the Royal Navy fanned out in a search pattern, a second set of planes of Catalina aircraft from Coastal Command in Ireland were scrambling to look for the Bismarck, but turned up nothing. Bismarck disappeared, and the search for the ship is now a gigantic game of chess. Admiral Lichens was aware that he lost their pursuers and kept in communication to Berlin, asking for reinforcements to Brest and Luftwaffe's support, especially the use of a 200 Condor, to which it has a reputation for anti-shipping. If Bismarck is closer to France, she would be safe. The British picked up the messages and tried to go off by signal triangulation for now until the coded messages were deciphered. The bearing calculations made it look like Bismarck is heading north to shake off Norfolk and Suffolk and the pursuers by heading back to Germany via the Denmark Strait. Home fleet would turn north and engage in this pursuit. But however, this would be a catastrophic error. Their bearings were the correct way, but the heading the wrong way. In actuality, the Bismarck was heading the opposite way. At Bletchley Park, the coded messages were deciphered, mentioning Luftwaffe's support at Brest, France. Checkmate is now in the Kriegsmarine's hands. At a sheer of luck at 10:30 a.m., a British Catalina plane piloted by an American aircraft spotted a long black streak of oil that is heading to France. And right away, Bismarck's AA guns opened fire at the aircraft. The pilot reported Bismarck's position, and Admiral Tovey's assessment was correct. They were going the opposite way. And Bismarck is 800 miles away to France and moving quick. Royal Navy would have no hope of success. Even with Royal Air Force mobilized, Bismarck would escape to France. But the realization is, when Winston Churchill issued the Sink the Bismarck order, it was sent out to all ships, including Force H coming from Gibraltar. They were heading north as fast as possible. Tovey got in touch with Force H and let Admiral Somerville know they would reach Bismarck in a day, and they have a day to make it happen. HMS Sheffield detached and began to shadow the Bismarck at flank speed, with Ark Royal beginning to arm their planes with magnetic torpedoes, hoping that they would detonate below Bismarck's armor belt. With the weather being a tactical factor, navigation is now made difficult. The pilots from Ark Royal made a mistake and noticed a large ship steaming to France and lined up their target, and ironically made the same mistake as the 825 Naval Air Squadron. Crew on the HMS Sheffield started signaling the pilots, but to no avail. Swordfish planes dropped their torpedoes with accuracy and exploded from the moment they hit the water. Sheffield dodged one, and another harmlessly bounced off the hull. The new magnetic torpedoes either exploded on impact in the water due to the impact of the detonators broke entirely, or the primer failed to ignite due to the cold water. As the pilots returned to the Ark Royal, they were briefed on what happened and reflected on their error. Deck crew reloaded the Swordfish planes with original contact torpedoes and had to move quickly. Bismarck is getting close to home waters. As the Swordfish planes took off as they started heading towards Bismarck, to which the crew on the Bismarck fired a gun solution at Sheffield, straddling the cruiser, and made smoke and left the engagement. This would give the Bismarck's position away to the Swordfish pilots, and right away, Bismarck's AA guns filled up the sky with a hailstorm of flak and began to maneuver wildly, thus undoing the damaged control patches, but also slowed her down too much. A torpedo that was dropped hit the Bismarck amidships, rupturing pipes and flooding the machinery spaces, to which that ship can brush off. But what's coming next is something she could not shake off. Pilot Lieutenant John Moffat and observer Dusty Miller were lining up a shot against the Bismarck, to which the ship was turning to port, right into the direction of the plane. Dusty Miller was observing by hanging himself off the plane trying to find a calm patch of ocean. He waited 20 seconds for a calm patch and had to fire a torpedo right away. The single crest of wave would throw off the direction and trajectory. And from the moment he saw a calm patch, he ordered out, "Let her go, John." Lieutenant Moffat fired the torpedo straight into the Bismarck that was making the left turn but lost all of her speed. The torpedo made impact straight into the steering compartment, jamming the rudders and causing severe shock damage.
Captain.
Admiral Litchens and Captain Lindemann ordered a full damage report, and once they received the news, it was devastating. One rudder was jammed into a full port, while another was freed.
The rudder won't move, sir.
At the start of her trials, due to her wide beam and displacement with poor screw placement, they would have to rely on asymmetrical thrust, but could only provide little steering.
Damage control, sir.
These issues were basically dismissed in tests. It has now doomed the ship as Bismarck maintained the slow left turn, and that turn is heading directly towards home fleet. At 2140, Lütjens made his final transmission to Berlin. "Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight until the last shell. Long live der Führer." As night fell on the Bismarck, the ship's bell tolls for the final time, because the next day there will be a price paid with iron and blood. In the previous part, Winston Churchill rallied all home fleet ships in Force H to find and locate the Bismarck. Force H found the ship and sent Swordfish torpedo bomber planes after the ship, but the Achilles heel of the Bismarck is her steering. In the first part, we discussed that the Bismarck is made up of 70% of iron and only the citadel was armored, leaving the bow and stern unarmored and vulnerable. As the Bismarck turned into the path of home fleet, Lütjens transmitted one more time, letting Berlin know that they will fight until the last shell. As night fell, the Bismarck glided silently through the night, being the ship of the damned. Reduced power to use alternate thrust and enable gunnery if necessary. The Royal Navy knows there's blood in the water, and it is almost time to strike upon the stricken ship. The destroyer squadron closed in on the Bismarck and tried to get some torpedoes in. Shadowing would not help. Heilrun, being a destroyer, closed in on the battleship, and they gave a little regard to themselves and got close to the Bismarck towards her own lookouts. Heilrun signaled to the Bismarck saying, "I am a Pole," before firing upon them. A hailstorm of shells as the ship still charged with no risk of damage. Bismarck would fire at them, straddling the ship, and the PO run kept on coming. It went on for a bit until close calls started coming, and PO run disengaged and fired star shells, illuminating the ship entirely for torpedo attacks, to which the destroyers were out of range. The guns on Bismarck are too dangerous to get close to, as HMS Cossack found out when her antennas got her sheared off by a 15-inch shell. As dawn approaches, Judgment Day comes with as the sun comes up. As the pilot loaded the war diary, pictures and videos and other documents into the AR-196 scout plane, upon inspection and prior to takeoff, they noticed that there was damage to the steam catapult that was discovered. And this was the same catapult that was damaged by the Prince of Wales in their first encounter. The cargo was retrieved and the plane was later disposed of. As dawn broke, the sky began to clear like a curtain of the final act. A price must be paid. A price paid in iron and blood. Mother Nature will make her presence known as gales start whipping up a frenzy of waves during an overcast day on May 27th of 1941. Home fleet would close in on the Bismarck, and then at 8:43 a.m., HMS Rodney and King George V closed in on the Bismarck with the wind coming from behind them. At 8:47, Rodney fired the first shots, a full broadside salvo. But in a twist, the high winds carried the salvos and missed the Bismarck entirely. Accurate gunfire would be hard, as speed would now be a guess rather than a variable, as it would be guesswork too. Bismarck fired back at both ships. Putting the rangefinders in the talons of the gunners would demonstrate their prowess by straddling the Rodney with 2 salvos. But it was only futile. This gunnery would not save the Bismarck. At 9:02 a.m., the Rodney fired back, and this time, a 16-inch salvo shell tore into the front structure, destroying the main fire control and obliterating the bridge, to where all the senior officers, Captain Lindemann and Admiral Litchens, were at the time. Turrets Anton and Bruno were now inoperable as the shockwaves wrecked their mechanism. To the rear, the aft fire control station took over the direction of Caesar and Dora, and due to the inability of the steering direction of Bismarck, the rough seas, and the lack of primary fire control station, their task is hopeless. The primary electrical system for both targeting and main battery had cables run over the exterior rather than underneath the citadel. Bismarck demonstrated world-class shooting, but now her salvos are an act of defiance. King George V started plunging fire into the Bismarck, penetrating her deck armor. Rodney would send torpedoes into the Bismarck, being the only battleship to fire torpedoes at another battleship, to which she scored a hit. Both ships, primary and secondary, sent shells into the superstructure and reduced it to molten mangle of metal at point-blank range. Both ships stopped firing their main batteries, and Norfolk and Dorsetshire joined in on the fray with their 8-inch guns into the ship, and every shell pummeled into the hull. And due to the short range, the citadel and belt armor held up while the superstructure and interiors are now a blazing inferno, from bow to fantail, while the hull remained. Unfortunately, the ship is listing and is sinking by the stern. First Officer Hans Oels called for orders to abandon ship and ordered engineering to open all watertight doors and place scuttling charges. Bismarck may be defeated, but she'd rather go out on her own terms, not the Royal Navy's. U-556 picked up a transmission from another German U-boat named U-74 and headed towards her and remained stationary. Both crews of U-556 and Bismarck shared a kinship together, being built next to the same ship and being lended a band from the Bismarck to play at their commissioning ceremony in January of 1941. U-556 made a promise to the crew of the Bismarck that they would watch over and protect them. But in this case, the sub watched helplessly as she noticed two of the British ships from the H-Force, HMS Ark Royal and Renown, the day prior. Had U-556 had torpedoes, she would have at least taken the HMS Ark Royal down. But there was no armament or any fuel left for U-556 except for her deck gun after they had a successful raiding mission. The sub couldn't do anything except hand off her patrol to U-74 and return to base. At 10:20 a.m., Bismarck lurched over to port as scuttling charges went off. Admiral Toby called a ceasefire as his ships were low on fuel and had to turn back. He ordered the Dorsetshire to finish off the Bismarck with torpedoes. These torpedoes were fired and eventually made their way into the stricken ship. One hit where the remains are left of the superstructure as the list was so pronounced. Afterwards, the sound of guns, shells shrieking, torpedoes whooshing by all died down, and the only sound are the waves crashing against the steel hulls. Bismarck's end is inevitable. She rolled over at 10:40 a.m. and slipped beneath the waves, shedding the superstructure and her guns before landing right side up, landed on the side on an extinct underwater volcano, and glided down until she reached the ocean floor. Defiant until the end, defeated but not dishonored. Dorsetshire and destroyer Maori picked up the remaining survivors from the water but had to leave the area as they detected U-74 on their radars as they approached the scene. Those that were still in the water that escaped from the inferno are at the threat of hypothermia or drowning. Those that survived were given immediate care but were treated as prisoners of war. Funeral services were actually conducted on both sides, one for the Hood and another for the Bismarck. Regardless of the size and political ideology, there was actually some humanity after the sinking. There were no cheers from the Royal Navy side, but exhaustion and grim satisfaction. The cruisers were battered and exhausted relief. Operation Ryan was over, and the hunt for the Bismarck was successful. From the 2,000 men that were on board the Bismarck, only 115 survived. 114 men, and if rumors are to be true, a cat named Oscar, to which would be named Unsinkable Sam. For 7 days, the Royal Navy lost their pride of the seas, and the Kriegsmarine lost their flagship. Prince Eugen's mission was failing due to mechanical issues and faults in her engines, and the Prince of Wales suffered mechanical problems. The German military shifted its naval strategy away from utilizing large surface warships for raiding the Atlantic shipping lanes. Hitler would prohibit any further major ship sorties, leading the Kriegsmarine only to rely on U-boats and confine remaining capital ships to port in France and Norway. However, less than a month later, the Wehrmacht and the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, launching a massive surprise attack known as Operation Barbarossa, each side presenting over 3 million Axis troops crossing the border and initiate a devastating war attribution aimed at destroying the Soviet Union. But that advance was stalled by the Soviet resistance before reaching Moscow. The Soviet Union invasion was a failure. Due to a failed blitzkrieg and logistics failure, as well as environmental factors, and the Soviet resistance overwhelmed the Nazis by surprise. By 1942, the campaign was recognized as a massive blunder, leading to a slow retreat and its defeat in 1945. But let us not forget this important statistic. The combined casualties on both sides are at 3,700. Young men that are sailors, NCOs, and officers that died. War should always be a last resort, and not the first resort like what the politicians of today think. We at History Inside a Nutshell would like to take the time to honor the sailors that fought and died 85 years ago. The story remained until 1989 when oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard, to which many of us know him as the man who dove down to the wreck of the RMS Titanic, discovered the wreck of the Bismarck standing upright, with their secondary armament still intact. With examination of the ROV Argo, they noticed that Bismarck's armor belt and interiors are still intact, as there are no signs of implosions anywhere on the ship, as no air pockets were visible. The only holes that were seen are what remain of the superstructure or above the waterline. The terror of the seas terrifies the local wildlife and defied the British to this very day. Bismarck still fascinates the people to this very day. In early 2025 and early 2026, Magellan began releasing new scans of the German battleship. This new footage includes some scarring images to the Bruno turret when the HMS Rodney fired upon the ship that rendered her main battery inoperable. In 2017, a side-scrolling mobile game named Azure Lane brought Bismarck to life, along with her sister Turbines, and the ships that partook in the real-world naval engagement during the Second World War. In 2019, she was ranked as third most popular character in the popularity poll. The story of the Bismarck was told in movie, poem, and book, documentaries, and even songs. It has been told many times by maritime YouTubers, and now this actually includes us at History Inside a Nutshell. Bismarck had to fall. Just as the regime she served had to fall for the good of humanity, the destruction of evil that had to be necessary. When Asgard fell to war and ruin, Midgard and Hell burned with it. The world back then was caught in a congregation that saw the deaths of 75 million people on both the Allied and the Axis powers. When the fire of war was extinguished, a new world was born from the ashes. A world that swore that will never see this kind of war ever again. While the road for peace is a long hope, it's a spirit that we must keep alive. If we live for better or worse, we shall never forget the name Bismarck.